Tombstone, 1881, $10,000 bounty on Liana Redhawk and the bounty hunter who couldn't walk away. Tombstone, Arizona Territory, 1881, was a town where the sun baked the dusty streets by day, and the saloons and gambling halls came alive by night. Miners, cowboys, and travelers crowded the streets, chasing dreams of gold and easy money, but danger lingered around every corner. Guns were never far from a holster, and a reputation could be built or destroyed overnight. Among the whispers of the town, one name was spoken with both fear and awe: Liana Redhawk. Lyanna was no ordinary outlaw. She was clever, quick, and always one step ahead. Men and women who had tried to catch her found themselves outsmarted at every turn. Stagecoaches were robbed without a single shot fired. Banks were emptied in broad daylight, and then she would vanish into the desert before anyone knew what had happened. Her dark hair, sharp eyes, and confident stride made her a memorable figure wherever she went. Some said she had eyes like a hawk, always watching, always planning. Others said she could disappear like the wind. The sheriff's office in Tombstone was small, understaffed, and barely able to maintain order. Sheriff James Callahan, a man with graying hair and a firm but weary expression, had dealt with his share of trouble. But Liana Redhawk tested even his patience and skill. She had become a legend before most people had even seen her face. The townsfolk whispered about her daring escapes and clever tricks, sharing stories over cups of coffee and whiskey in the mornings and evenings. It all started quietly, as it always did. A stagecoach traveling from Tucson to Tombstone had been ambushed one hot afternoon. No one was hurt, but a large sum of gold had been taken. Eyewitnesses remembered a woman who moved with unmatched speed, her horse appearing and disappearing like magic along the dusty trails. Some said she had help. Others claimed she worked alone. Either way, she left a mark on the town that would not fade. News of her crimes traveled fast. Merchants feared for their goods, travelers worried about their safety, and lawmen grew frustrated at their inability to catch her. The sheriff knew that normal measures were no longer enough. He needed help, and he needed it fast. That was when the idea of a bounty came into play. A $10,000 bounty was posted for her capture, a huge amount for the year 1881. To put it in perspective, a miner could spend a lifetime working and never earn that much. The reward caught the attention of bounty hunters far and wide. Some came hoping for fame, others for the money, but all were warned. Liana Redhawk was dangerous, clever, and impossible to predict. The bounty notice described her, a woman in her late 20s, sharp features, dark hair, and a quick mind. It warned that she was armed and extremely cunning. People in Tombstone crowded around the sheriff's office to see the poster, studying it as if the very glance could help them understand the woman behind the crimes. Among the crowd was a man named Jasper McCall. He was a bounty hunter by trade, a man whose skill with firearms and tracking was known across several territories. But Jasper was different from most bounty hunters. He had a calm, measured way of moving, always thinking before acting. He had earned his reputation honestly, but life had not been easy. Years of dangerous work had left him with a limp, a reminder of the risks he had taken and the fights he had survived. The townspeople often whispered that his injury made him less effective, but those who knew him well understood that his mind was sharper than any gun. Jasper read the bounty notice carefully. $10,000 was a fortune, enough to change a man's life. But he did not make his decision lightly. Capturing Liana Redhawk would not be easy. She was unpredictable, smart, and fearless. And more than that, Jasper felt a strange pull, a curiosity about the woman behind the legend. He had heard stories, seen traces of her work, and now he wondered what kind of person could move through life so boldly and remain free. While Jasper considered the bounty, Lyanna was not idle. She moved through the desert trails with precision, aware of every sound and shadow. Her horse was fast, her senses sharp, and her mind always calculating. She knew that townsfolk would be talking about her, about the bounty, but she also knew that fear and rumors could be useful tools. She could appear in one town, then vanish to another, leaving only a trace of her presence behind. Her next target was rumored to be a small gold shipment heading to Tombstone. She observed it carefully, noting the guards, the route, and the timing. She did not move recklessly. She moved with purpose. To her, every detail mattered. One wrong step could mean capture, or worse. But Lyanna had learned to trust her instincts, and they had never failed her. Back in Tombstone, Jasper began to gather information. He visited saloons, listened to the whispers of travelers and miners, and pieced together patterns that might indicate where Lyanna would strike next. He noted the desert paths, the river crossings, and the small towns along the way. He did not chase blindly. Every step he took was measured, every move calculated. As he worked, he could not ignore the stories of her cunning. One story told of how she had escaped a posse by riding her horse straight up a steep canyon wall, a feat thought impossible. Another story told of how she had outwitted a band of men who had tried to corner her in a small cabin. She was daring, but she was also careful. She did not rely on luck. She relied on skill, preparation, and intelligence. Tombstone itself buzzed with tension. Merchants locked their doors earlier than usual. Miners carried their guns openly, and travelers reconsidered their routes. The sheriff posted additional deputies, but the sense of unease could not be shaken. Everyone knew that Liana Redhawk could appear anywhere at any time, and no one could predict her next move. Jasper felt the weight of the task ahead. He was not just hunting an outlaw. He was tracking a mind that was as sharp as his own, and that both excited and unsettled him. Could he capture her? Should he even try? The money was tempting, yes, but the challenge, the story, the legend, that was something that drew him in more than gold ever could. Meanwhile, Lyanna prepared for the next move in her quiet, calculated way. She understood the bounty, the hunters who would come, and the traps that might be set. She respected intelligence when she saw it, and she had a sense that someone would be coming after her soon. But she did not fear them. She feared only carelessness, and she trusted herself to be careful. The stage was set. Two skilled, determined individuals, one driven by duty and curiosity, the other by survival and cleverness, were about to enter a game that would stretch across the harsh Arizona desert. The townspeople waited anxiously, gossiping about what might happen next, unaware that history was quietly unfolding around them. Liana Redhawk's name continued to spread through whispers and rumors, but to Jasper, it became more than a name. It became a challenge, a puzzle, and a test of everything he had learned in his years as a bounty hunter. And somewhere in the desert, Lyanna prepared, as always, for the next move. In Tombstone, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The saloons filled with music, laughter, and tension. Every eye seemed to be looking for signs of trouble, and every ear strained for a hint of the outlaw who had captured the imagination of the entire territory. The story of Liana Redhawk had only just begun, and the first chapter was about to unfold in ways no one could predict. Jasper McCall had spent years tracking men and women who had broken the law, yet none had been like Liana Redhawk. The bounty on her head was the largest he had ever seen, $10,000. And while money could be tempting, it was not the only thing on his mind. He had learned long ago that chasing a clever outlaw was as much about understanding the person as it was about tracking the actions. Lyanna was not just a thief. She was a strategist, a thinker, and someone who had managed to stay free when almost everyone else would have been caught. Jasper walked slowly through the streets of Tombstone that morning, his worn boots kicking up clouds of dust. Merchants were opening their stores, and the sound of hammers and saws filled the air as repairs were made to buildings that had been damaged in small accidents, or sometimes from more violent encounters. He noticed men glancing at him as he passed. Some recognized him, some did not. Jasper had a reputation, but it was a quiet one. He preferred it that way. Being well known could make a hunter's work more difficult, and he had learned that staying in the shadows often provided a better advantage. He entered the saloon near the center of town, a place where information flowed as freely as whiskey. Inside, the air smelled of dust, smoke, and the faint scent of spilled beer. A piano played a soft tune in the corner, and a few men and women whispered over card games. Jasper chose a table in the back, out of direct sight, and ordered coffee. He did not come for entertainment. He came for information. He had spent hours listening to the townsfolk, asking subtle questions without revealing his true purpose. A miner might mention that he saw a lone rider moving fast along the northern trail. A shopkeeper might say that a horse had been spotted grazing outside town in unusual places. Each detail could be a clue, and Jasper was careful to record everything in his mind. He understood that Liana Redhawk was not careless. Every move she made left a trace, but those traces were meant to confuse and mislead. Only someone patient and observant could follow them. As he sipped his coffee, Jasper overheard a conversation at the next table. Two men spoke in low tones about a shipment of gold coming into Tombstone the following week. They spoke of guards, routes, and timing, unaware that someone was listening. Jasper's ears sharpened. This information could be vital. If Lyanna was planning another strike, he needed to know the details before she could act. Jasper leaned back, considering his options. He had to decide how to approach her. Some bounty hunters would rush blindly into a confrontation, relying on speed and force. Jasper knew better. Liana Redhawk was not someone who could be caught by force alone. She required strategy, patience, and careful planning. He also knew that one mistake could cost him dearly, especially with his limp. The injuries slowed him, but it had also taught him the value of thinking before acting. Later that day, Jasper visited the stables to examine his own horse. He chose a strong, fast animal, one that could handle the rough desert terrain. As he stroked the horse's mane, he thought about Lyanna. Stories of her clever escapes and bold moves filled his mind. He had heard that she could ride her horse up a nearly vertical cliff, disappear into a canyon, or even trick pursuers by leaving false tracks. Each tale only strengthened his determination. He respected her skill, but he could not allow himself to be distracted. The bounty was his task, and he intended to see it through. Jasper spent the next few days preparing carefully. He checked his weapons, studied maps, and planned routes through the desert. Every path, every canyon, every trail could hold a clue or a trap. He thought about the weather, the time of day, and the possible movements of Lyanna. The desert was unforgiving, but it was also full of hiding places, and he knew that she would use every advantage it offered. At night, the town settled into a quiet rhythm. Lamps glowed in windows, the wind whispered through the streets, and the occasional horse's hooves echoed on the wooden planks. Jasper walked the streets slowly, observing, listening, and learning. He knew that Lyanna's intelligence was her greatest weapon, and he needed to be ready for anything. Meanwhile, Lyanna was far from idle. She moved silently through the desert, keeping to hidden trails and avoiding areas where she might be seen. Her dark hair was tied back, her face calm, her eyes sharp and alert. She was aware of the bounty, of the hunters who would come for her. But she was not afraid. Fear could be a tool, but overconfidence was dangerous. Lyanna relied on careful planning, preparation, and her own instincts. She had learned that the desert was both friend and foe. It could hide her movements, but it could also reveal the unwary. Lyanna's next plan involved a small gold shipment from a mine outside Tombstone. She had studied the route, the guards, and the timing. Every detail mattered. She chose a path that would allow her to observe from a distance, to wait for the right moment, and to strike with precision. She moved with patience, knowing that one wrong move could end her freedom. She also knew that she could not underestimate any pursuer, especially someone skilled like Jasper McCall. Back in town, Jasper continued his preparations. He spoke with miners, merchants, and travelers, piecing together information about the desert trails and recent sightings of Lyanna. He began to recognize patterns, noticing which areas she had visited, which routes she favored, and which strategies she employed to confuse her pursuers. It was like solving a puzzle, and Jasper enjoyed the challenge. He knew that brute force would not capture her. He needed to match her intelligence and outthink her at every step. One afternoon, Jasper decided to follow a trail leading north of town. It was a narrow, dusty path used by travelers and traders, but it also led to open desert and hidden canyons. He rode slowly, observing tracks, broken branches, and other small signs. Every clue told a story, and he paid attention to everything, knowing that Lyanna would not leave obvious evidence of her movements. As he rode, he recalled some of the stories about her escapes. How she had once fooled an entire posse into chasing false tracks for days. How she had hidden a stolen shipment of gold under the roots of a tree, only to retrieve it later. How she had tricked guards into believing she was in one place while she was already miles away. Each story seemed unbelievable, yet Jasper had learned to trust the accounts of those who had encountered her. Liana Redhawk was a master of her craft, and he would need all his skill to catch her. That evening, Jasper camped near a small canyon, careful to choose a spot that offered good visibility, but also cover. He lit a small fire, cooked a simple meal, and watched the stars appear in the clear desert sky. The quiet of the night allowed him to reflect on the task ahead. He knew that this hunt would be unlike any other he had undertaken. It was not just about money. It was about skill, strategy, and understanding the mind of a woman who had become legend. Meanwhile, Lyanna rested in a hidden ravine, her horse tethered nearby. She tended to her gear, checked her weapons, and reviewed her plans. The desert was dangerous, and mistakes could be fatal. But she was careful, confident, and calm. She had learned to trust her instincts, and so far, they had never failed her. She understood the risks, but she also knew the rewards. Freedom, skill, and survival were more valuable than any gold. As the night wore on, both hunter and hunted prepared for the days ahead. Jasper studied maps and tracks, thinking about his approach. Lyanna watched the stars, considering her next moves. Each was aware of the other, even if they had not yet met face to face. The desert held them in a quiet tension, a waiting game of skill and patience. By morning, the sun rose over the desert, casting long shadows across the canyons and trails. The town of Tombstone began its daily rhythm once more, but far from its streets, two figures moved through the desert, one with careful purpose, the other with calculated freedom. The story of their encounter was only beginning, and both knew that the coming days would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. Jasper McCall and Liana Redhawk were on a collision course, but neither knew the full extent of the challenge ahead. The desert was wide, the trails were many, and the mind of each was as sharp as the other's. What would happen when they finally met? How would skill, patience, and courage play out in the harsh Arizona landscape? For now, both waited, both prepared, and both moved silently through the world of dust, heat, and shadows. The bounty on Liana Redhawk's head had drawn Jasper McCall into the game, but the game itself had rules known only to those clever enough to survive. And survival in the deserts of Tombstone was not guaranteed. It had to be earned with every step, every thought, and every decision. Jasper McCall had been tracking Liana Redhawk for several days now, and the desert was beginning to test him. The sun rose early, blazing across the sand and rocks, making the trails hot and the air heavy. Every step, every sound, and every shadow had to be carefully observed. One wrong move, one careless thought, and the trail could be lost, or worse, he could walk straight into a trap. He rode slowly along a narrow path between two steep ridges, his eyes scanning the ground for the faintest clues. A broken twig, a hoof print, or a shift in the sand could reveal where Liana had passed. She left no obvious trail. She was too clever for that. Jasper had learned to read the desert like a book, understanding the way the wind moved, how animals reacted, and how people left their marks. Even with his limp slowing his pace, his mind moved quickly, connecting each small detail into a larger picture. Jasper paused near a dry creek bed, crouching to study a series of tracks. They were fresh, likely only a few hours old. A horse had passed here, and the footprints suggested more than one rider. But there was something unusual. The trail was misleading in parts, with footprints crossing back and forth, designed to confuse anyone following. He smiled quietly to himself. That was Liana Redhawk, always clever, always thinking 2 steps ahead. He decided to follow the main trail, knowing that any false tracks would eventually lead to a true path if he stayed patient. He had learned long ago that persistence was often more valuable than speed. A clever outlaw could outrun a man for a day, but a careful hunter with patience could close the distance over time. Jasper felt the weight of the responsibility, but he also felt a strange excitement. This was not just a hunt for money. It was a test of skill, intelligence, and courage. As he rode, he thought about Liana. Who was she, really? Was she driven by greed, survival, or something else? Every story he had heard painted her as bold, intelligent, and fearless. Some tales described her helping townspeople in need, even as she stole from the rich or lawless. Others told of her using clever tricks to avoid violence, preferring escape and cunning over confrontation. She was more than just an outlaw. She was a force of nature, moving through a harsh world with skill and independence. Meanwhile, Liana Redhawk was aware of the hunter pursuing her. She moved through the desert with grace and caution, knowing that someone was following the traces she left behind. But she was confident in her planning and her ability to remain unseen. She often paused on ridges to observe the trails below, noting disturbances in the sand, changes in vegetation, and the faint marks of human activity. She understood the desert intimately, and she knew how to use it to her advantage. Her next move was calculated. She planned to approach a small settlement where supplies and information could be gathered without revealing her identity. Disguises, careful timing, and subtle observation had allowed her to enter towns before without being recognized. She moved like a shadow, blending with travelers and merchants, never drawing attention. The desert had taught her to be patient and quiet, to wait for the right moment rather than act recklessly. Jasper, aware that she would eventually need to enter a town, decided to anticipate her move. He studied maps, considering all possible routes she might take. He knew that she was intelligent, but he also knew that she needed certain things: food, water, and rest for herself and her horse. These necessities created opportunities for tracking her, though she would likely try to mask them as best as she could. Jasper's plan was to watch the settlements quietly, remaining unseen while observing any suspicious activity. The desert sun reached its highest point in the sky, and Jasper paused under the shade of a large rock formation. He drank water slowly, careful not to waste it, and took a moment to rest his legs. Even with his horse carrying much of the weight, walking over rough terrain with a limp was exhausting, but the rest also gave him time to think, to consider the patterns he had observed, and to plan the next stage of the pursuit. In a distant canyon, Lyanna adjusted the saddle on her horse and checked her gear. She had learned to maintain her equipment carefully, knowing that one broken strap or dull blade could be disastrous. Her eyes scanned the horizon, noting distant dust clouds that might indicate another rider. She suspected someone could be following, but she had practiced evasion for years and trusted her ability to disappear. Every step she took was deliberate, every action intentional. Later in the afternoon, Jasper followed a winding trail that led through a narrow canyon. The walls rose high on either side, casting shadows that shifted with the sun. The trail was difficult, rocky, and steep, but Jasper moved steadily, observing every detail. He noticed small signs: an unusual hoofprint, a scuff in the rock, a branch that had been bent back, that confirmed he was on the right track. Lyanna had passed this way, and she had done so with caution. He decided to make camp near the canyon's entrance, choosing a spot that offered good visibility of the trail ahead. He built a small fire, careful to keep it low and hidden, and prepared a simple meal. As he ate, he reviewed the tracks and the observations he had made throughout the day. Each clue suggested that Lyanna was heading toward the settlement north of the canyon. If he was patient, he might see her without being detected. Night fell over the desert, bringing cooler air and long shadows. Jasper remained alert, listening for any unusual sounds. Coyotes called in the distance, and the wind whispered through the canyon walls. He knew that Lyanna would likely find a safe place to rest, but he also knew that the desert had few truly hidden spots. A clever hunter could sometimes spot evidence that even a skilled outlaw could not completely erase. Meanwhile, Lyanna had found a hidden ravine where she could rest safely. She tethered her horse to a sturdy tree and inspected the area for any signs of pursuit. Finding none, she settled in to eat and rest. Her mind, however, remained sharp. She reviewed her plans, thinking about the next stage of her journey and the possible dangers she might face. She had learned to anticipate the moves of others, and she knew that a hunter like Jasper McCall would be careful, patient, and observant. The next morning, Lyanna moved early, taking advantage of the morning light to navigate the trails more safely. She knew that most people were slower in the early hours, and that the desert animals could signal danger if approached carefully. Her movements were precise and deliberate, leaving minimal traces, and she constantly adjusted her path to avoid leaving a predictable trail. Every day in the desert was a test, and she had long since learned to respect its dangers. Jasper watched the settlement from a hidden ridge, using his field glasses to scan for any unusual activity. He noticed figures moving among the buildings, some carrying goods, others tending to horses. He studied each one carefully, looking for signs of someone traveling lightly or behaving differently from the others. Lyanna was clever, but Jasper had spent his life studying human behavior and movement. He knew that small details often revealed the truth. By mid-morning, he spotted a woman approaching the town, moving with confidence and awareness. Her dark hair and sharp eyes reminded him of the descriptions he had read on the bounty notice. She appeared calm and composed, blending with the travelers and merchants, but her careful movements suggested she was not merely passing through. Jasper's pulse quickened. This was his first close observation of Liana Redhawk in the wild, and it confirmed what he had suspected. She was bold, clever, and aware of her surroundings. He continued to watch, noting how she interacted with the environment. She did not linger unnecessarily, avoided attention, and moved with a purpose. Each step was deliberate, and she seemed to anticipate possible dangers before they occurred. Jasper admired her skill even as he reminded himself that he could not let respect slow him down. The bounty was his mission, and patience was essential, but so was caution. The day wore on, with Jasper observing from a distance, and Lyanna carefully managing her path through the settlement. Both were aware of the desert and the possibilities it offered, places to hide, routes to escape, and small advantages that could make the difference between success and failure. The tension grew, not in the open, but in the quiet moments of observation and calculation. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jasper and Lyanna prepared for the night. Jasper retreated to a hidden spot to rest and maintain his horse, while Lyanna found a concealed place where she could monitor the surroundings. Both understood that the next day could bring critical developments, and each knew that the desert demanded vigilance, patience, and strategy. The hunt had entered a critical phase. The distance between hunter and hunted had closed, and the desert held both challenges and opportunities. Jasper McCall and Liana Redhawk were moving closer, yet neither had made a mistake, and neither had revealed their full capabilities. The next encounter, whenever it came, would test everything they had learned and every skill they possessed. For now, they waited, each aware of the other, each planning, observing, and surviving. The desert was wide, the paths were many, and the story of the hunt was far from over. Every trail, every shadow, and every movement could change the outcome, and both hunter and hunted knew that the desert would not forgive carelessness. The sun rose slowly over the desert, casting long shadows across the jagged rocks and dusty trails. Jasper McCall adjusted the strap on his saddle and surveyed the canyon below. For days he had followed the trail of Liana Redhawk, tracing her movements through the harsh Arizona wilderness. The desert had tested him in ways he had not expected, but it had also prepared him. He knew that today might bring the first true encounter, the moment where careful tracking and observation would meet cunning and skill. Jasper moved quietly along the narrow trail, his eyes scanning every detail. He had learned to read the desert, noticing the smallest clues: a scuff in the sand, a broken branch, the faintest hoofprint. Each mark told a story, and each story revealed a part of Lyanna's path. He could feel her presence nearby, a sense sharpened by experience and intuition. She was close, and he knew it. Liana Redhawk had anticipated this possibility. She had sensed that someone was following her, and she had prepared. She moved with quiet confidence, her horse steady beneath her, her eyes alert to every sound. She knew the desert could hide her, but it could also reveal her if she made a mistake. Every step she took was deliberate, calculated to avoid detection while keeping the advantage in her hands. The canyon they both approached was narrow, with high rock walls on either side. It offered limited visibility, but plenty of hiding spots. Jasper knew that this terrain could favor Lyanna if she chose to use it cleverly. He dismounted quietly and led his horse along the trail, taking care not to make unnecessary noise. The weight of the rifle on his shoulder reminded him of the responsibility he carried, not just for the bounty, but for every decision he made in the desert. Suddenly he saw a movement ahead. A shadow slipped across the rocks, swift and deliberate. Jasper froze, his eyes narrowing. Could this be Lyanna? He held his breath, scanning for more signs. His instincts told him she was near, testing him, perhaps even observing his approach. The desert was a silent battlefield, and the slightest sound could reveal everything. Lyanna paused behind a rock, her eyes fixed on the movements below. She had noticed signs of pursuit, subtle disturbances in the sand and dust, small tracks that did not belong to the wind or animals. She knew that Jasper McCall was close, a careful hunter who would not make a mistake lightly. Now, she respected skill when she saw it, and she also understood that confrontation was not just about guns. It was about strategy, psychology, and awareness. For a long moment, both remained still, observing each other without revealing their positions. The canyon held its breath, the wind whispering through the rocks, carrying the scent of dust and sagebrush. Jasper's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. Patience, he reminded himself, was the key. One wrong move could allow Lyanna to vanish again, as she had done countless times before. Finally, Lyanna made a subtle movement, a small shift in position that revealed just enough of her presence to be noticed. Jasper's eyes locked on her, and for the first time he could see the woman behind the legend. Her dark hair framed a face that was calm, focused, and intelligent. Her eyes were sharp, assessing him with the same intensity he felt directed at himself. In that moment, he realized that he was not just facing an outlaw. He was facing a mind as skilled as his own. The tension between them was immediate and palpable. Jasper spoke first, his voice low but firm. "Liana Redhawk," he said. "I've been following you for days. You don't need to run anymore. We can talk this through." Lyanna's eyes flicked toward him, then away, studying the surroundings. "Talk?" she asked quietly, her tone calm but filled with quiet strength. "Do you think words will solve this? Do you know why I do what I do?" Jasper remained still, careful not to show hesitation. "I don't need to know why," he replied. "I just need to know that you understand the danger you're in." "Ah, you don't have to make this worse than it needs to be." She studied him for a moment, then slowly stepped out from behind the rock, keeping her distance. Her horse stayed calm beside her, and she moved with careful, deliberate steps. "I understand danger," she said. "I understand danger," she said. "I've lived with it every day. But you think this is about danger. You think this is about law and order? But it's not. It's about choices. Every move you make defines you." Jasper felt a strange respect for her words. He had faced many outlaws, but few had challenged him as she did. "And your choices?" he asked. "Do they define you or do they harm others?" Lyanna's eyes narrowed slightly, but she did not respond immediately. She shifted her weight, scanning the canyon walls for possible escape routes. "Sometimes choices are survival," she said finally. "Sometimes they are freedom. You may think your way is the only way, but it isn't. I've learned that the hard way." The words hung in the air as tense and heavy as the canyon itself. Jasper considered them carefully. He had learned that judgment and action had to be balanced with understanding. Liana Redhawk was more than just a target. She was a person shaped by her world, by the choices she had made, and by the circumstances that forced her into this life. For a moment, they simply observed each other, two skilled, determined individuals assessing the other. The desert around them was silent, yet full of tension. Every sound, the rustle of a leaf, the distant call of a bird, the shifting of sand, carried meaning. Both knew that the next move could change everything. Then Lyanna made a small, unexpected gesture. She reached toward the ground, picking up a stone and tossing it lightly. It bounced along the rocks, creating a subtle distraction. Jasper's eyes followed the movement, and in that instant, she moved slightly, testing his reaction. It was a simple trick, but it revealed her confidence and intelligence. She was daring, but she also understood caution. Jasper smiled faintly, acknowledging the skill in her maneuver. "You're clever," he said quietly. "I'll give you that." "And you're patient," she replied, her tone almost teasing. "I can see why people talk about you." Their brief exchange was unusual for a confrontation, but both understood that this was as much a battle of minds as it was of skill. Lyanna's movements were deliberate, measured, and strategic. Jasper's response was equally calculated, observing her actions, predicting possible outcomes, and preparing for contingencies. Neither made a mistake, yet both were testing the other. The sun climbed higher and the heat began to rise. The desert was unforgiving, and every decision carried weight. Jasper knew that a rash action could allow her to escape, just as her careful planning could outmaneuver him. Yet he also knew that hesitation could be costly. He had to maintain balance, staying alert and ready for whatever she might do next. Lyanna, too, was aware of the delicate balance. She had faced hunters before, but none had moved with the combination of patience and skill that Jasper exhibited. She respected that, but she also knew that she could not afford to underestimate him. The canyon offered both danger and opportunity, and she planned to use it to her advantage if needed. For hours, they remained in a tense stalemate. Words were minimal, but the unspoken understanding between them grew. Each recognized the skill, intelligence, and determination of the other. Neither wanted to give ground, yet neither made a reckless move. It was a quiet, intense battle of observation, strategy, and psychological awareness. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the canyon, Lyanna finally spoke again. "You could take me in," she said softly, almost as if testing him. "But you won't. You're not the type to act without thinking. You weigh every decision, and I respect that, even if it means you're after me." Jasper considered her words carefully. He had thought about this moment for days, and now that it had arrived, he realized that capturing Liana Redhawk would be more complicated than he had imagined. "I do weigh my decisions," he said quietly, "and I do respect skill when I see it. But that doesn't change the task before me. I'm here to do a job." She nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in his statement. "Then perhaps this is the only time we truly understand each other," she said. "For now, we are equals in skill, even if our paths are different." The canyon fell silent again, the wind carrying the sounds of the desert, and both took a moment to rest and observe. The first confrontation had passed without violence, yet the tension remained. Both understood that the next encounter would likely be even more challenging, as the desert held both traps and opportunities, and neither would make a mistake lightly. Jasper and Lyanna parted that evening with a mutual understanding. Neither had won or lost, but both had measured the other's skill. The desert was wide, the trails were many, and the story of their encounter was far from over. Each had learned something about the other, and both knew that the next meeting would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. As night fell over the desert, They went their separate ways, one toward the town for supplies, the other into the quiet wilderness to plan the next move. The desert held its silence, carrying the story of their confrontation across the canyons and ridges, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The desert stretched wide and silent as Jasper McCall rode through the narrow canyons early that morning. The sun was just rising, casting soft golden light across the rocky landscape. For days he had tracked Liana Redhawk, following the faintest signs, reading the subtle hints she left behind, and thinking about the woman he was pursuing. After their encounter in the canyon, he could no longer see her as just a bounty or a prize. She had become something more, a symbol of freedom, skill, and independence that he could not ignore. Jasper's horse moved steadily, and he kept his senses alert. Every rock, every shadow, and every rustle of the wind could carry information. He thought about the canyon encounter from the day before. Lyanna had tested him, spoken to him, and revealed more about her mind than she probably intended. She had challenged him in ways he had not expected, forcing him to confront not just her skill, but his own values and intentions. The desert seemed endless, but Jasper knew he was approaching a point where choices would matter more than luck. The tracks he had followed for days led him toward a small outcropping of rocks, where he suspected Lyanna might be resting. It was a place that offered both protection and visibility, a perfect spot for someone who understood the desert. He dismounted quietly, leading his horse with care so as not to disturb the surroundings. Lyanna, meanwhile, had chosen the outcropping for her own reasons. She had carefully observed Jasper's movements during the previous encounter and had anticipated the possibility that he might follow her. She had prepared small changes to her usual trail, minor adjustments that could mislead anyone attempting to track her. Yet she knew that a skilled hunter like Jasper could see through deception. She had to be ready, alert, and cautious. As the day wore on, Jasper noticed subtle signs of her presence. A small piece of cloth caught on a thorn, a few faint hoofprints leading toward the rocks, small details that indicated she was near. He paused, crouched low behind a rock, and studied the terrain. Every instinct told him she was within sight, and yet he knew that rushing forward could cost him the opportunity to understand her, to see her clearly, and to make the right choice. He moved slowly, deliberately, scanning every shadow and angle. The desert heat pressed down, but his focus never wavered. He felt the weight of the rifle, the strap of the saddle, and the responsibility he carried, not just for the bounty, but for the consequences of his actions. Every choice he made now would shape the outcome of this long pursuit, and he understood that there was more at stake than money. From her vantage point, Lyanna observed the subtle shifts in the landscape. She could see Jasper moving carefully, noting how he studied the ground, how he avoided obvious trails, and how he paused to consider each step. She respected his skill, but she also knew that the desert had countless hiding places and escape routes. She could disappear again if necessary, but she also felt a strange pull to test the connection between them, to see how far their understanding of each other went. Hours passed as they silently observed one another. The desert sun climbed higher and then began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the rocks with warm shades of gold and red. The silence was tense, filled with anticipation. Neither made a sudden move. Both understood that this was not just a chase, but a meeting of skill, intelligence, and mutual respect. Finally, Jasper spoke, his voice calm but strong. "Lyanna," he said, "you could keep running, but I want you to understand something. I'm not here to punish you, and I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I was hired, yes, but also because I need to see this through correctly. I need to know that my choices are right, and that no one gets hurt unnecessarily. Liana's eyes met his, and she allowed herself a small, thoughtful smile. "I understand," she said, "and I respect your honesty. You've tracked me carefully, watched my every move, and yet you have not acted recklessly. You could have attacked or cornered me at any moment, but you didn't. That takes skill and restraint." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jasper knew that the choice before him was no longer simple. He could take her in for the bounty, claim the money, and return to a life of work and routine. Or he could walk away, leave her free, and accept that some things were more valuable than gold: principles, respect, and understanding. For a long time, neither spoke. They simply observed each other, the desert stretching endlessly around them. Each considered the decisions that had brought them here, the paths they had chosen, and the consequences that might follow. The canyon walls echoed the silence of their thoughts, carrying the weight of every choice they had made. Finally, Jasper made his decision. Slowly, he lowered his rifle and stepped back. "I won't take you in," he said quietly. "Not today, not here. You've earned your freedom, and well, I respect that. I cannot chase you for money when there is something more important at stake. Go your way, Lyanna. Live your life." Liana's eyes widened slightly, a mixture of surprise and relief. She studied him carefully, searching for any sign that he might be tricking her. Seeing none, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "Ah, thank you," she said softly. "You could have taken the bounty. Most would have. But you chose something better. You understood the value of respect and restraint." They both knew that this was not the end of the story, but it was the closing of a chapter. Jasper watched as Lyanna mounted her horse and rode toward a distant trail, her movements deliberate and controlled. She disappeared into the desert, blending with the landscape as though she had never been there. Jasper stood for a long time, watching the horizon. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the rocks and sand. The desert was quiet again, holding the story of their encounter in its wide, empty spaces. He felt a mixture of relief, admiration, and reflection. The hunt was over, but the experience had changed him. He understood that some pursuits were not about money, fame, or victory. They were about understanding, patience, and the choices we make in the face of challenge. He returned to Tombstone slowly, keeping to the trails and avoiding unnecessary attention. The town was as bustling as ever, but he moved through it with a quiet awareness. Merchants and miners glanced at him, some recognizing the well-known bounty hunter, but he paid little attention. His mind was occupied with thoughts of the desert, of Liana Redhawk, and the lesson he had learned about respect, skill, and human choice. Over the next days, townspeople spoke of the strange encounter in the canyon. Some claimed to have seen signs of a mysterious hunter and a clever woman moving through the desert. Others told stories of a confrontation that ended without violence, where intelligence and patience had replaced force. The legend of Liana Redhawk grew, and Jasper McCall's reputation as a careful, skilled, and thoughtful hunter was further strengthened. Jasper himself reflected on the events often. He had chased outlaws before, but never one who had challenged him so thoroughly, not just physically, but mentally and morally. He realized that some pursuits are not meant to end in capture or victory. They are meant to teach lessons, to reveal character, and to test the limits of skill and patience. Lyanna had done that, and in doing so, had earned his respect. Months later, Jasper would sometimes ride the desert trails alone, remembering the encounter and the lessons he had learned. Liana Redhawk became a legend not only for her daring and cleverness, but also for the way she had tested one of the most skilled hunters of the territory. Their paths had crossed briefly, intensely, and memorably, but the choices they had made shaped both of their lives forever. The desert remained wide, silent, and unforgiving. Trails shifted with wind and rain. Animals moved through hidden paths, and travelers passed through towns unaware of the legends that walked just beyond the horizon. Jasper knew that Liana Redhawk was still out there somewhere, free and clever, continuing her life with the skill and awareness that had always defined her. And he knew that he too had changed, carrying with him the understanding that some victories are not measured in gold, but in choices, respect, and the courage to do what is right. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in deep reds and oranges, Jasper rode slowly, reflecting on the chase, the confrontation, and the lessons learned.